Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. This is my last Friday in the mornings. I'm moving to the afternoons next week. And what a grim week it has been. Not since 9/11 has anything this horrific actually happened to this many people in the United States. And I'm 50 miles south of it, so I might be a little bit too close. But Ben Domenech is still in the Beltway, and he joins me every Friday. Ben, ordinarily, good morning. I'd be talking to you about one big bill or two. I'd be talking about the Carter funeral, everything that Donald Trump and I talked about on Monday. But Tuesday came along, and now we have a catastrophe, the likes of which I haven't seen since 9/11. I've never seen in California. What do you make of all this? I know too much. I know too much about land use. I've been practicing law out here for 27 years. I just know too much to have the right amount of perspective. What do you make of this catastrophe?
Well, one of the things that, and first off, Hugh, thank you. It's been such a joy, joining you in the mornings over the last, period of time. I think we've been doing this for, a year and a half, I think,
Yep.
something like that. And it's always a pleasure, and good luck in your new slot. You are obviously much closer to this, and so you have the perspective of someone who is close. One of the things that we do in America, and we've done, I think, to our detriment for quite a while, is we nationalize everything. We turn things that are essentially local issues or should be handled locally by the people closest to the problem into big national subjects, and that inevitably happens in the broad and flat media landscape that we have here today, where everybody can have an opinion. My parents, I think, as you know, are both foresters. Their background is in forestry, and everything that they learned from their days working in that field, informs the perspective that says that clearing underbrush has become something that's far more controversial, particularly among the environmental community, than it ought to be, because you have to make choices and there have to be trade-offs. And while you have, the attitudes of people who think that nature should just be nature, there's the other perspective, a Christian perspective, that man should subdue the earth and that we should protect the houses and the lives, the livelihoods and the homes and businesses of families and Americans first, as opposed to, engaging in these kinds of practices that are ultimately very dangerous. For too long, you had this underbrush in California that needed to be cleared, needed to be dealt with, needed to be handled. That's just one aspect of this, but to hear people turn on the from offices in New York and studios in New York and D.C. and turn this into some kind of commentary about climate when this is a local issue that could have been prevented, I think is really inappropriate and wrong. The performance of Karen Bass in this moment is really astonishing. I mean, I know that she was considered to be one of the potential VP picks back in the day by Joe Biden, and a lot of people thought that she would have been a smarter choice than Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has her many, many, many faults, but this is such a terrible performance on Bass's part. It's astonishing to think that she was ever at the top ranks of Democrats who could have been vying for that job. And I think, you get the perspective now of the difference between having local officials who will take responsibility and commit themselves to solving problems immediately and diving back into it versus people who just want to demagogue. I had, of course, the comparison, and I immediately texted a Texas friend of mine, pour one out for Ted Cruz in this moment, because Ted obviously was someone who was lambasted, including by Karen Bass at the time, for taking his family to go to Cancun during the ice storms that Texas was experiencing. But Ted's a U.S. Senator. He is not in the line of command on any of the things having to do with fixing that ice storm. Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass are directly in the line of command. And the fact that they seem to be both so incompetent, so flippant and dismissive, so unwilling to answer questions, and basically trying to blame shift in this moment is a total indictment of their capacity to be an executive.
Ben, I got to ask you for your guess. You're a young man with a young family. Do you think you will see the Pacific Palisades rebuilt in your lifetime?
I think so, Hugh, only because I have optimism about the capacity of Americans to come back from things. I've experienced it too often to think otherwise. But I'll tell you, I don't think California has put themselves in a position to make that an easy job. And it may be a thing where we'll test the limits of my lifetime in order to see that happen. My wife lived in L.A., near a lot of this, and she has a lot of friends who were near a lot of this. many years ago before I met her. And, so many places and so many people were affected by this that she knows personally. And it's just a tragedy. It's a horrible tragedy and one that it could have been avoided. The attitude that I would have at this moment is saying, if you want to see the Pacific Palisades rebuilt, if you want to see something change, if you want to make sure that this never happens again, then you as Californians need to seize the fact that you have the ability to make your voices heard in this moment and change the course, change direction. That's going to require, and you know this much better than I do, sweeping away a lot of the regulatory decisions, a lot of the government decisions that have been made over the course of this dominant Democratic Party within the state for so many years. They have gotten away with this for so long, and then you deal with the consequences of it, and then maybe change happens. We see it in New York with their crime situation, where people wake up to reality and they say this didn't work. We're going to change course. You saw it obviously with many of these Soros prosecutors who were swept away in November, thankfully, after years of an experiment that only damaged people's lives. And that's something that I think is an opportunity to happen right now, but it's going to take Californians doing it themselves in order to achieve it. There's nobody that's going to be able to come from outside top down and just sweep all these different decisions away in an instant.
Now, one of the smartest guys I know sent me a text after I spent the last hour detailing, just cursory detailing, sort of like the first time I sit down with a client who wanted to build 4 houses on 2 acres. And I explained to him, okay, we got the local government in the city of LA. It's a nightmare to begin with. But then we're going to have to go to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We're going to have to make sure that the Air Quality Management District's on board. We've got to talk with the California Department of Fish and Game. We have to make sure that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the United States EPA did not have an objection to anything that you propose to do, and they always do. So I would always begin by setting expectations. I'm trying to set this guy wrote me, he said, I couldn't agree more. They have no idea, talking about the Pacific Palisades people who, the poor bastards are in the, can I say that? If I can't, blank that out. They're in the coastal zone, which means that the Coastal Commission, which is where you go to die as a permit, a new Manhattan project is needed to just get us out of our own way. The federal government has a role here. Do you think the Republicans will have the guts to actually take LA into receivership? Because that's what we need. There are 70,000 people living on the street. There are tens of thousands of people who have lost their homes. Nothing works. And the Olympics are coming here in 4 years. What do you think?
I think that Republicans should have that kind of courage, but I'm not sure that they will because of the blowback necessary. And one of the things, though, that I think that they need to keep in mind is that inevitable blowback comes in the context that the fact that they have a majority is due in part to their overperformance in the state of California. And so there's an opportunity here to actually earn that, to say that there's a need here in this state that has, while it is written off now on a presidential scale, while it is written off as something that Republicans can win statewide, has actually provided the margin for their majority, their slim majority in the House, in a very key way, thanks to recruits, thanks to the way that they've been able to win some of these narrow districts. And that's something that I think they should pay attention to, because if they don't live up to that, then there's lessons to take away from it too. And those lessons could be the difference in terms of whether they're able to expand and actually have a foothold again in California politically and not. And so from my perspective, it's an act of courage, but it's also in their own interests to provide leadership in this moment that shows the alternative, that shows that they're willing to make these hard choices that Democrats have been completely unwilling to make because of their beholden nature to different interests and to the far left.
I'm talking with Ben Domenech. He is the editor-at-large for The Spectator. He is also a Fox News contributor, and you can listen to his podcast and just go to Apple, iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you find your podcast, listen to Ben's podcast. During the break, I'm going to ask him this question. I'm going to set it up so that you know what's coming, and then I'll play the tape of it afterwards. Blue governance has failed comprehensively in the city of New York, where people are not safe, in the city of Chicago, where they're not only not safe, they can't get an education because the schools have utterly collapsed, and throughout the state of California in ways large and small, but the largest way, of course, is the failure of the ability to have the water in the fire hydrants in the Palisades, or the resources available on the ground, or a mayor who is present, or a governor who can answer. A comprehensive failure of the Blue Project, the Progressive Project, wherever it is. Does that sink in is my question for Ben Domenech. Do people who sit in the middle of this country and maybe liberals and maybe people who are social liberals and all of the Hollywood stars, all of them who have lost their homes, for whom I feel genuine sympathy because they have just lost everything, do they understand it didn't have to happen and it doesn't have to be that way? I'll get Ben's answer during the... Welcome back, America. Ben Domenech is my guest. Ben, you heard the setup. Will it change anything? Will the failure of the Blue Project in New York, Chicago, and California change minds?
I do think it will change minds. I don't know if it will change what actually happens in the areas, and the reason being that in some cases I think that things are so bad that people who have taken the lessons away from it will leave and won't come back. You know, the people who have already lost everything in California, do they stay there? Do they try to rebuild? Or do they say, you know what, this is just the final lesson, this is the final straw, I'm going to go and move with all my friends who moved to Austin over the course of the past several years, and I'm just going to do that instead. I saw, video of, multiple people who are are prominent comedians and actors, talking about the losses that they've experienced, and it's like, well, do you want to keep living there? Do you want to try to come back and do everything that's hard related to that? Or do you view this as being, this is the last straw, I'm getting out? And I think that is a little bit different than what's going on in New York. I think people there are determined to turn things around, that they really have a lot of local pride, obviously, and they are less likely, I think, to leave the city, and they're going to continue to fight for it. And I think that the lessons taken away, especially from how awful public transit and the subway system, everything that's related to that has turned into, I think that they are, it's been so clear that the future for New York, I think, is actually a bit brighter because of the lessons. In Chicago, the level of corruption, the level of political dominance from the left, has been such a firm grip. I'm just not sure that there's going to be, an alternative approach that's going to work there because the political machine is simply too powerful. And so I think it's a little bit, uneven. But one thing that should be important in this moment is for all the Republicans who said and advocated over the last, decade plus, many of whom I know, many including at the Manhattan Institute, Reinhard Salam and the people who've been leading over there, Rafael Manuel, who's one of their best experts on crime in the city. They've been hammering away at the idea Republicans, should not abandon these city issues. They should lean into them because it's not just something that benefits them politically, but it's something that's important for the American people. And I think that that's the correct advice. I think that there's a place for conservative policy, for Republican policy that pushes back against the anti-law and order language of the left. And it's important to do so and not just say, well, let them live with the consequences of what they've voted for. I
agree with that. I have a quick question, though. Rubber meet road time, 30 seconds, Ben. Washington, D.C., when I moved back in 2016, was vibrant and alive, and it had renewed. Mm. And in the course of 8 years, it's fallen into chaos in many respects. Should home rule be repealed if we care about our nation's capital?
I'm completely in favor of repealing home rule. It's the worst case scenario of both a deeply corrupt and deeply incompetent government, and there's never any consequence for it. I think that the Congress should reassert its control over that area, and I don't care about the arguments of people on the other side. It's been an abject failure, and very clearly is not going to reverse itself without a major change.
I hope people are listening inside the Beltway this morning from our Republican colleagues, because if they had stones, they would do not only that, they would temporarily, if not completely, repeal the Endangered Species Act, the applicable parts of the Clean Water Act, the parts of NEPA and CEQA. They would put Southern California into receivership. They could do a lot. They could make a statement. We'll see whether or not they do. Ben Domenech, thank you. I know you're fighting a cold. I appreciate the time this morning. Follow him on X at B Domenech, and do listen to his podcast, The Ben Domenech Show.